Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for today's webinar. Today's webinar is being recorded. The replay will be made available in a couple of days once we've, of course, done the usual editing and everything else. Questions should be submitted through the chat window that you see there. We'll try to answer them through the chat or during the live Q&A session following Jay and Simon's presentations. For today's webinar, we're going to be giving away 3 Logitech Brio webcams. Now, if you haven't experienced one of these, they deliver spectacular video quality up to 4K for video conferencing, streaming, and recording. So what we're going to do is select 2 random attendees and 1 attendee with the best question from the Q&A session to each win a Logitech Brio. And we'll notify those winners via email later today or tomorrow. So video conferencing technology has come a long way. And in today's webinar, you're going to learn how the best kept secret in video conferencing has become the leader, and how they are now making it easy to take advantage of the benefits of video collaboration in your environment. Our presenters today are Jay Stevenson, who is the head of cloud solutions at GBH, and Simon Dudley, director of product strategy at Logitech. So gentlemen, I'm going to get started with Jay here. So take it away, Jay.
Thanks, Paul. I appreciate it. I think what I'd like to do is, if I could take a few minutes, I'd like to talk a little bit about who we are, what we do, and the value we provide over here at GBH. Share some ideas as far as how we may be able to augment your video conferencing. And then from there, turn it over to Simon to wow us with Logitech and the value that they are just crushing it with in the market. So GBH has been around for about 30 years. We started out in the UCC space selling audio headsets, and from there we moved to the desktop for phones and whatnot and cameras. Then over into video conferencing, and then about 1.5 to 2 years ago, we started to move in to the cloud space, which is when I was brought in to support that. And then from there, we've been able to add performance assurance into the category as well to become what we feel to be a trusted advisor in the UC space. When we think about UC service components and the components we just discussed, we see them as all-inclusive in the video conferencing or the UC infrastructure, but we also see them as potential failure points if you're not alert and aware of what's going on. So where GBH competencies come into play is we help our customers try to drive and help augment or enhance their UC design and management. We help with video interop as well. So if you're running endpoint sessions and you need to expand the breadth of your audience through the use of cloud meeting solutions or audio conferencing, other things, we try to help make sure that it's a streamlined process. We have our Tech Shield team to support any kind of device protection. And then from a cloud meeting solution perspective, we have our visibility solution that helps support monitoring and analytics, and then our control solution to try to help with enhancing the quality experience of the user. So we work with a number of leading industry experts and vendors that are out there today. Logitech, we're very excited about. They have really taken the market by storm, and we found some significant value in how we can partner and align with them to bring best of class UC infrastructure and competencies to the market. From a customer perspective, in the 30 years, we have cultivated a number of key customers in various verticals. To date, we have about 1,000 to 1,100 active customers that are using either one or more of our portfolio competencies to help drive their overall UCC strategy. So my responsibility here at GBH is to focus around our cloud portfolio. The three solutions that we bring to market is our Connect solution that brings best-of-class cloud meeting solutions to the market and our customers. Visibility, which is a patented multi-vendor video conferencing performance solution. And then Control, that helps support application-aware, hybrid WAN, SD-WAN capability, so we can actually help you, for lack of a better word, augment or load balance your applications across the infrastructure to help improve efficiencies as well as in-user experience. So if we can take a few minutes, I want to focus a little bit about our Connect portfolio and what we're doing to bring value to the market. A lot of times customers, and they've been working with room-based systems for quite some time, and over the last few years, we've been working to find ways to drive synergy with expanding the breadth of our meetings and our solutions to our audience that is disparate throughout the universe, whether they're here in the US or multiple offices or even throughout the world itself. They found that by bringing in a cloud meeting solution to augment that room-based service, they've been able to actually provide best-of-class value to those end users and bring them into meetings that typically they would not be able to join if they weren't close to a room-based system. Typically, these solutions are provided as a service from the cloud. A lot of them are used quite frequently whether from standalone meetings, but also to augment room-based system sessions. And typically they all provide great value when it comes to collaboration tools. So like we're doing today with chat, texting, as well as sharing of content. So our methodology here at GBH is to allow our customers to connect the way they want. We have relationships with, as you can see, all of the industry leaders from a cloud meeting solution perspective. But what we find is that our customers come to us and ask, which one's the right one for me? How do I use it? And what can I do with it to help expand my value? So if you think about cloud meeting solutions, they're easy to use and easy to access. They're easy to get started. The majority of them run can allow for a download application on your computer, or provide you with a URL link for quick access to the meetings and to get them up and operational. You can join from any device. Case in point, this morning I was coming back from another meeting and I didn't want to kill myself in the car. So I actually accessed a cloud meeting solution via Audio Bridge, which allowed me fast audio-only access, but allowed me to participate via my mobile phone. I've also had other situations where we've talked to our customers about cloud meeting solutions, and one of the first questions they ask is, can I join from another device? So using my computer, or can I use my tablet or iPhone? And I actually had one instance where I was using my Surface Pro for the meeting itself. I then had my iPad next to me, and I brought up the meeting to show one profile, and my iPhone on the other side to come into the meeting and show my other profile. And quickly they were able to assess that they had clear quality, clear experience, and I think Simon will even show you some of the value that we can provide in that space. You can connect literally to anyone within your environment, your organization, or with other organizations by just adding them to the meeting request. And then, like I said, the majority of them provide optimal quality wherever you are. Now, at a glance, what I'll share, and this is ever changing, this might be outdated today or even tomorrow as they bring more technology into play, but what I found is that when reading the Gartner report on the Magic Quadrant, we found that from a cloud meeting solution perspective, they had certain requirements they wanted these guys to be able to offer to be considered part of their research or their study. And as you can see in the left column, they had others as well, but the high level ones were each had to be able to do a presentation delivery as we're doing today, participant desktop and application sharing, allow for text and chat, provide basic security either through URLs or passwords or logins, and then mobility access as we discussed as well, and recording capabilities. So when you look across the top with the solutions that we work with today, the numbers vary. The numbers I have in this chart show their basic licensing or their advanced licensing for end users. So with Zoom as an example, with their Pro license, they offer 100 participants versus Skype for Business up to 250, and BlueJeans currently is at 100 for their corporate license. But all of them allow for streaming capabilities to expand your audience, as we're doing today, where we're exceeding those numbers to be able to reach a much larger audience in the hundreds and even thousands. Additionally, what I like about them is that they all offer a plugin. So for Outlook perspective, you're able to either download it to your device, or it can be downloaded through Office 365. And then from that perspective, I can set up a meeting. I can click a button. So for Zoom as an example, immediately it populates my meeting that has all the information on how to register and log in. I type in my subject, add all the attendees, I click send, and immediately my meeting's ready to roll at a moment's notice. And then most of them also offer a toll or toll-free charge. A lot of them started out offering VoIP only, thinking that the majority of the customers were using that technology to be able to access from an audio perspective. But what they found was that a lot of the users were needing to come in, like my example I showed with you from earlier today. So some do charge for the service, a very nominal fee to cover the bridge expense, but others offer it out of the box as part of their offering. Now, before I turn it over to Simon, one of the other things we wanted to talk about today was what can we do to create synergy or value to our customers and our prospects. And what we've done is we worked with Logitech to create unique bundles in the marketplace to be able to drive value, where we can package some of their best of class camera technology along with the audio components from the likes of Java and Crestron to create synergistic bundles that can create a better quality experience for the end users. If you're interested in more of this, you can obviously reach out to us, or if you'd like, the URL below at gbh.com/Logitech-bundles, and you can find out more about the offerings and then reach out to us for more detail. So we'll take questions toward the end, but what I would like to do now is turn this over to Simon Dudley to talk about some of the great things that Logitech is bringing to market to help enhance your overall UCC experience. So Simon, I'll turn it over to you.
Lovely, thank you, Jay. And thank you everyone for attending our show today. I shouldn't really call it a show, should I? Informational webinar, or otherwise known as a show. So you give me 1 second and I will start my slide deck, which I'm doing because I'm being very clever from my iPhone. Right, while we're speaking, by the way, let me give you a bit of background about who I am and what I do. So my job is to be the head of sales enablement for Logitech. And what that means is that I get to go and talk to people all the time about lots of interesting things. And I also get to spend a lot of time for our sales organization. Give me a second. Typical of these things, I do apologize. Yesterday when we did the run through of this particular event, I, of course, was in an aeroplane, because that's what sales enablement salespeople get to do. They get to spend their entire time teaching other people how to sell our technology. So, if you'll give me 1 second. Here we go. Right. I do hope you're going to see my slides. Are you all going to see my slides now?
Yes.
That's great. Thank you very much. So that's me. I get to go around the world telling everyone about video conferencing. I've been in video conferencing about 30 years now. And I remember a client seeing this technology back in about 1995. This lady got so excited about it. She said, "This is amazing. Everyone's going to buy video conferencing and the streets will be empty. No one will travel anywhere except to go on vacation." I wish she'd been right. I got to do about 250,000 miles last year, all around the world, showing people why video conferencing is something they should adopt. So if we make this technology work, then the only person left in the world traveling will be me, I suppose. But let's hope it does it before, or we get this problem solved before I retire and or keel over. So I want to talk today about a vision of the future of video conferencing. This market has, well, frankly, it's failed. I've spent 30 years in the video conferencing space. I sold the first video conferencing system as a 7-year-old child in 1992, and I've been selling it ever since. But here's the problem. Video conferencing is one of those technologies that's always been the technology of the future. Most people haven't put it in. In fact, there is approximately, according to people like Wayne House Research, about 40 million small meeting rooms around the world. And about 1 million of those, so 2.5%, have got video conferencing. So in 25 years, me and some other people a bit like me have effectively sold a few million video conferencing systems, but most of the world hasn't paid any attention at all. And we think that's a major problem. In fact, as Einstein once said, to do the same thing and expect a different result is the very definition of insanity. I don't want to, in another 25 years from now, be standing here in front of you folks all saying, "Oh, look, we've got to 1 in 20 meeting rooms have got video communications in." So if we're going to make the future look different from the past, we have to act differently as a result and think differently. So I want to talk about the 3 forces that are really changing the video conferencing market as we speak. It's become a really interesting space. And in fact, it's one of those funny examples of when the success criteria in a market change. And during that change, there is a transformation in the way that people buy the technology and use it. And then there is a change in the way that the technology gets sold. And I'm really interested in that as a concept. In fact, I wrote a book about it a couple of years ago, not about video conferencing, but about many other things. So there are basically 3 elements that are transforming the video conferencing market. There's the compute, there's the scale, and there's the choice. So let's talk about each of those in a little bit of detail. So one of the things that most people don't notice is they notice that computers are getting faster, but actually they don't really think about what the long-term ramifications of that are. So you could argue, and I do, that there are basically 4 parts or 4 stages, shall we say, of a technology. There's the "it's almost impossible" stage, and then there's the "it's possible but the user has to work around it" stage. Then there's the "it's actually quite good and therefore the technology works around the user," and then it disappears. And the final stage is when a technology effectively dissolves into a greater workflow or a greater way of people doing work. Okay, so let's think about the video conferencing market. 25 years ago, I was selling things that some of you may remember as things called Picturetel Concords, right? They were lovely, $100,000 each, 29-inch display, about $18 a minute to ring the US from the UK or the other way around, right? And we sold, dozens a year. Of course, the idea at that time of running a video conferencing system on a PC was ridiculous, right? There's no way at all you could possibly do it. the compute requirements of these things were enormous. But Moore's law, the law that says that the compute power doubles every 18 to 24 months, is an inexorable crusher of applications. In fact, at that rate of 18 to 24 months for a doubling of performance, you get about 10 times more compute for the same money every 5 years. So in 10 years, you get 100 times. In 15 years, you get 1,000 times. In the last 25 years, you get 100,000 times more compute for the same money, or the same compute for 100,000 times less money. It's one of the reasons that video conferencing used to be all about hardware-based dedicated devices in meeting rooms, because frankly, we had no choice. Today, that's not true at all. The market's truly fundamentally changed. In fact, I did a video conference call last year using WebRTC and a web browser on a thing called a Raspberry Pi. A Raspberry Pi was a small computer invented in the UK by an international consortium, and it cost $35. In fact, they now do a low-level Raspberry Pi, which I suspect could do a video conference call, and it was so inexpensive they gave it away on the front cover of a magazine. The computer being $9. It's the Raspberry Pi Zero. It's the size of a credit card. So video conferencing has gone from 25 years ago, virtually impossible. It's gone through all the other stages. It's now trivially easy for computers to deal with, and it is incredibly inexpensive. Now, I'm not suggesting that you all rush out and buy Raspberry Pis to run your video conference calls on, but certainly the idea that you need dedicated hardware to run that in the meeting room is now no longer true. The next part to consider is the effect that that's also had on the infrastructure of the environment. It really wasn't that long ago, I mean, no more than 5 or 6 years ago, that people were paying $5,000 or $6,000 per port to run a multi-way video conference call. So if you think about that, if it's $6,000 a port, let's make the maths easy. It was only $5,000 a port. And this, by the way, is a 100-way video conference call. This call we're on right now. So we would require $500,000 worth of technology to make this work just a few years ago. And I mean, literally 5, 6, 7 years ago, that's how much it would have cost you. But today, of course, the compute requirements, well, the compute requirements technically are the same, but the ease with which you can do that has just dropped through the floor. You can now do it on any of the cloud providers I've got up on my screen. Almost all of them would allow you to do exactly this. Jay was talking about some of that technology just moments ago, and it's incredibly inexpensive. The Zoom account I'm on right now is $15 a month. I could do back-to-back 250-way video conference calls if I chose to every day for the whole year, and it would cost me $15 a month. So the compute requirement has crushed the requirement not just for video conferencing technology in the meeting room, but also in the middle of the network. And that means that cloud has taken off like crazy. In fact, you could argue that really nothing but cloud-based video conferencing solutions are the way forward. A few manufacturers do make infrastructure devices, Cisco being an obvious example. And you know what, it's a fine solution for those clients like the CIA who are somewhat unlikely to want to use a cloud solution. Let's hope they don't, but I guess that remains to be seen. So let's talk about scale, right? I mean, part of the scale situation, of course, is price. But the other one that isn't related to Moore's law, although not directly, is Metcalfe's law. Now, Dr. Bob Metcalfe, the man who invented Ethernet, said back in about 1973, no, 1980, according to my own slide, which I wrote not that long ago, I should remember that number, he said that the utility of a network goes up at the square of the number of nodes in it. Now, as I'm sure most of you can guess, I'm actually based in Austin, Texas, and so is Bob Metcalfe these days, and I've actually got to know him, which is a bit weird. They do say don't meet your heroes, and that's probably a correct point. He's a slightly interesting character, stroke mad as a log. But anyway, Bob told me when I met him recently that actually he made that statement up. It just sounded good. And it just turned out to be true. So what does that utility of a network goes up at the square of the number of nodes in it mean? Well, it means quite simply the network's more useful if more people are on it. After all, if you're in a market and you bought a video conferencing 25 years ago, then you're in a scenario where, well, that's great. I come along and sell you a thing and it's $100,000 and you've got no one to ring. A bit of a waste of money, wasn't it? Then the next person on the call comes along and they buy something a little later and it's newer and shinier and a bit cheaper. And as soon as they get it, then they've got one person to ring. Then the third person to buy it buys the latest, cheapest, best system. They've automatically got two people to ring. It's the network effect, right? You think of the internet as patently the most extreme example of that. Facebook, even in spite of their own best efforts recently, have still got 2.2 billion people. I must say, when I joined them about 10 years ago, I was about the 50 millionth member or something like that. And I thought they'd peaked. It seems soon there's going to be more Facebook accounts than there are people. So the reason this matters is when the technology costs an absolute fortune, as it did up until very recently, the opportunity to have that network effect was very restricted. Now the technology's become much more usable, much more scalable, and as a result, even those older, expensive, dedicated solutions are becoming more useful because you've got more people to call. Let's talk about choice, right? Well, the days we believe, and in fact the market is ably demonstrating this to be completely true, the market is demonstrating or voting with its feet that the days of the monolithic solution are dead. Now, I've got nothing against the other players in the market, and they're all fine companies, and I used to work for some of them. But the idea that a company is a Polycom house or a Cisco house or a life-size house or any one shop is now no longer true. And it's no longer true for a couple of reasons. The first one is that traditionally video conferencing has been a technology used by the very largest companies to speak to themselves. Back in the 90s, we used to put video conferencing systems onto ISDN lines. ISDN, for those of you who remember, stands for It Still Does Nothing. It was a very unpleasant technology, extremely expensive, but it did mean you could ring external to your own organization. And in fact, I used to deal with some of the big banks, and they were beginning at the early 2000s to begin to use that technology to talk between the banks. Then the internet got good enough that you could run video conferencing over IP networks. Everyone dumped ISDN like a hot potato. It was a dreadful technology and therefore best got rid of. But the problem was, of course, every organization retreated behind its own IP firewalls. And the idea that organizations would be prepared to open up those firewalls to allow video conferencing to work was simply not going to happen. So what happened is that most organizations used it to speak to themselves, so they stuck to one manufacturer and they got on with their lives. In the last few years, the growth of people like, well, all the people on our screen here, right, from Apple with FaceTime or Google Hangouts or Zoom or Pexip or Starleaf or Blue Jeans or TrueConf or Fuse or any of these other guys means that now that the solutions live in the cloud, organizations can now speak not just to themselves. And in fact, we're noticing that most of the enormous growth in this market, and it is growing at incredible rates, are not the very largest organizations. They're the mid-market. The mid-market is realizing that video communications throughout their supply chain are changing the way that they do business. Now, the other reason why this is important is because IT, to some extent, due to things like shadow IT, are losing control of their users. If you think about it, chief marketing officers often have fairly large IT budgets. They don't think of them as IT budgets. They think of them as marketing tool budgets. So, for example, in most organizations, there's the CMO, and the CMO is looking after all of their Marketo or all of their Salesforce. The IT department isn't doing that. the departments below them, the lines of business, are doing their own thing. The same is becoming true for communications technologies. So organizations are not having a monolithic solution anymore. They are picking one that there is their own standard, and then they have to make certain that the organizations, the sub-organizations within their overall company can then speak to whoever they want to. Very few IT directors want to be the guy who say, or the girl who says, hey, we put this technology in, and the CEO says, I want to do a Google Hangout with our next client, and they don't want to admit that they can't. That's a very bad situation. A little word on intuitive, right? Intuitive is something that I, to my shame really, have bandied around, as have many others in our industry and all of industry for the last 25 or 30 years. The new system, it's intuitive, they will tell you. Well, you know what? I just took these three. I do hope that you can't identify the manufacturers, and I have been kind and blurred out their names. But if you can guess who makes all three of these, then you'll know that if you need to have a big card telling you what all the buttons do, it isn't intuitive. In fact, I would contend pretty strongly that there's no such thing as intuitive. It's a lie. What there is familiar. They can be easy to learn even, although I would be hard pressed to argue that any of those three are easy to learn. But they are not intuitive. So if you can't do intuitive, and you probably can't do easy to learn, right? Because there's quite a few facets to these technologies. What can you do? Well, my strong argument would be give users familiar, right? Most of us are able to use a computer, but I'll admit now that I'm a terrible Windows 10 user because I haven't used Windows for 10 years. I've been well, maybe longer. I've been a Mac user for a very long time. So you give me a lovely new Microsoft Surface Pro. It's a gorgeous piece of technology, and I really struggle to use it. And I'd learn over a period of time. But what I don't want to do is learn in front of all my colleagues and rivals and friends in the office with some senior management in there while we're trying to communicate with some other location. In fact, people are more afraid of public humiliation than they are of death. As Jerry Seinfeld once said, that means that most people would rather give rather be in the box than give the eulogy at a funeral. Difficult to prove one way or the other, but it does mean that if you give someone a user interface that looks like the ones on the screen now, and you say, that's fine, you just use this in front of all your friends and colleagues, they will resist a lot. So I want you to think about that when you're talking about mass deploying the technology. Because another issue is, in the old days could be 5 years ago, by the way, in the old days of video, you'd probably have an IT guy on staff who would be sat outside the boardroom, and when it didn't work, they could all start screaming and throwing things around, and they'd rush in and fix it. In the modern world, where you've got video deployed throughout the organization to actually make it useful, that can't scale. You cannot put an IT guy outside of every meeting room. So, funny thing is, I talked about this as if all of this is going to happen in the future. Well, without trying to blow Logitech's trumpet too hard, we got into this market 3 years ago. And in fact, not in dollar terms, but in unit terms, we now actually equip more meeting rooms than our two biggest rivals, who I've labeled conveniently as competitor 1 and competitor 2. And you might be able to guess who those are, but I'm not allowed to comment for legal reasons. But it is true, and it's based on Wayne House research data. We equip more meeting rooms than both combined. So many people are like, oh, well, your idea of the market changing is an interesting idea and it might happen in the future. Well, I can tell you now, it's already happened. So I'm going to talk briefly about one of our products, or one space really that we get involved in. So I wanted to talk about Huddle Spaces, right? Huddle Spaces is, for video conferencing, a pretty new environment. This is an environment which traditional $10, $20, $50,000 video conferencing didn't really hit. The reason it didn't hit is because most companies could only afford to put video into 1 or 2 rooms in their organization, And of course, they put them in the boardroom, which was actually generally a terrible place to put video conferencing, not only because boardrooms are where people talk about other people doing work rather than actually doing work, and there is a fundamental difference there, but also because most people within the organization never get any access to the boardroom. It is reserved for the senior management, and nobody else is brave enough to go and ask. So the huddle space has a rather different set of success criteria than larger meeting rooms. So for the purposes of the argument, we define, and by the way, so does most of the market, pretty much everybody agrees, the huddle spaces are different because the sizes and the shapes are different. So we define a huddle space or a huddle room as typically no bigger than about 10 by 10 or 10 by 12 feet. It typically has a very small table. It often has that table pushed right up against the display. If it has any kind of audio devices in it at all, well, you don't want them on the table because, well, everyone turns up and puts their laptops on the tiny table, therefore blocking the audio, and also it gets in the way. The other thing with huddle spaces is they need to be where people can come in, use their own existing technology, expect no support from the IT department because the IT department can't possibly scale to this number of devices. And they simply want to get on with it using the tools they're already familiar with, right? It brings us back to the intuitive versus familiar experience. And of course, ultimately, it needs to be globally available. And because you can't put all your video conferencing in one room, well, you can, but it doesn't become very useful. And you also need it to be priced at a point where it's mass deployed. So as a result of all of that, we've come up with this little diagram demonstrating what we think is a successful huddle space. So for that very small room with the camera against the display, you need a super wide angle camera, but it mustn't be so wide that you end up with everyone looking like they're at the bottom of a well. You've got to have the audio off the table, because if you don't, it gets in the way and then it gets muffled and knocked and annoying sounds come from those laptops. It's got to work with whatever applications users come up to the room with. So whatever application they have, it's simply got to work with it. And then it's got to be open standards, partly for security, but also because you want it to be scalable to whatever application they use today and may adopt in the future. Next, it needs to be mass deployable. Now, we thought long and hard about what mass deployable meant. And I don't know about everyone else in the room or in the call, but I rarely, if ever, walked into a client's site and they had a meeting room for 6 people or 8 people or 12 people or 20 people, and they had 4 chairs. People don't do that. What they do is they put a meeting room for 12 or whatever size number of people it is, and they put that number of chairs in. So we worked on the principle that the technology needed to be priced at no more than a couple of chairs in the system or in the room. The whole idea that a system would be, 5 or 10 or 20 times the price of all the other technology in the room meant that it wasn't going to scale and people weren't going to invest in it. And remember, that matters because if you're the first guy to buy it and no one else can afford it, then you've wasted your money buying it. It's like a pool party where everyone's waiting for everyone else to get into it. So, and then of course, the other 2 points to consider is it needs to be standardized from a security perspective, right? You don't want something running some operating system like Android as a great example, which can be, well, a little nerve-wracking from a security point of view. Ask Target about that, if you like, and their HVAC system. And of course, you've got to be able to have it on a global basis. One of the things with video conferencing is you only get the advantage at the other end of a call. So if your guy in Japan or China or Indonesia goes and buys something really terrible, they benefit from the lovely thing you've bought here, and you fail to benefit from the horrible thing they bought at their end. So you definitely want something you can get everywhere. So there's the success criteria. I won't go into that now. If you'd like a copy of the slides, I'm sure that can be arranged. So what did we do? Well, we built this weird looking thing called Logitech Meetup. Why did we do it? Why does it look so different to the other cameras or the other solutions that have preceded it? Well, it looks different because it does a different job. The microphones and speakers are built into the display or into the device. The device sits above or below your display. It has a super wide angle camera. 120 degrees means that even at 18 inches, you're still in the shot if you're 3 feet to the side. So you really are never out of shot. The days of the lawyer seat that we used to have in video, where the lawyer would sit closest to the camera and therefore could take notes and not be seen, no longer applies to this sort of technology. So and these things are inexpensive too. So we have technology that's under $1,000 that equips an entire meeting room experience, which you turn up. It's a USB device. You plug in the application you're already familiar with, whether that's on your laptop or a PC in the meeting room. It gives you a fantastic solution. It works extremely well. And we think at the prices we're talking about here, this is a mass deployable solution. And why does that matter? Well, think of what Logitech is. Logitech is that company that you buy. We're kind of Honda, right? It works ridiculously well forever and just gets the job done. Is it flashy? Well, some of our products are, but we don't think of ourselves in those terms. We think of ourselves as the guys and girls who make the technology simply work and scalable. We ship about 3 million things a week from Logitech. When was the last time you bought a Logitech product that didn't work? That's not what we do, right? We work great products at inexpensive prices for mass deployment, and hence the reason we've taken this market so effectively. And there's another button. We're certified with all the major players. We've got remote controls. I'm not going to go into the details now, but it shows you that a new set of success criteria define a new type of technology, right? This is not the sort of solutions you would have seen in the past because it does a different job. So on that note, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I would be happy to turn over to Jay and Paul, and we can talk about questions or any other issues people have.
Thank you, Simon. Appreciate it. Let me get back to the quick slide. And Paul, we'll turn it over to you. I know that I've seen a few questions come through, but if you could provide some guidance on that, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. That was great. And thank you, everyone, for the activity in the Q&A chat. Lots of great questions and lots of great answers. Nicole, great job there with the answers.
Thank you.
Now let's see what we can pull up here and start a discussion. Let's see here.
I've got one here while you're looking. Someone's asking about room size preferences for Meetup. Can I, when you're thinking about other ones, can I answer that?
Please.
Okay, so Meetup, we designed Meetup originally for small huddle rooms or huddle spaces. They're rooms of 10 by 10 feet, 2 to 6 people. That was its sweet spot. We found out as with a client, a very large client, just last week, in fact, and they said, well, our huddle rooms it's not suitable in our huddle rooms. And I said, all right, we better come and have a look. So I went down there, and their huddle spaces were 15 by 15 feet with 11-foot ceilings and whiteboards all over all 4 walls. So the volume that we were trying to move air around in was amazing, an awful lot larger than the area we thought we were. Now, frankly, what we did, I took an audio engineer with me, and we put a new piece of code on it, and we increased the volume by about 2 dB, and it solved that client's problems. Interestingly enough, we thought in larger rooms, the Meetup camera, which is 120-degree field of view, which is wonderful for wide angle, but obviously a very wide angle camera, even with the digital zoom we have on it, is going to struggle with a camera or a table that's 20 feet long. And we wouldn't recommend it in those environments. But what was interesting for us was that the microphone pickup, and after we changed the volume of the audio were absolutely great. And in fact, even in a room as big as that, the client was more than happy with the camera. In fact, they thought it was wonderful. It stopped what they said that they really liked was it stopped the camera moving around. And I talked earlier about how people are more afraid of public humiliation than they are of death. Well, in my experience of this, one of the problems not of public humiliation or death, I haven't done either of those, but I have been in plenty of meeting rooms that when the speaker starts, or when someone starts speaking, the camera starts to rotate and look at them. And that's the greatest mute button ever. Many people who aren't familiar with the technology really hate the idea of being on camera. A product like Meetup, particularly in a small room, well, the camera is very flat, it barely moves, and the users don't even know if it's looking at them or not. And it makes them a lot more comfortable with the technology. So I know that was a ludicrously long answer, but I hope that was useful for what size rooms you can put it in. Way bigger than we first thought. It's a simple answer.
Yes. Hey, Simon, here's another question that I saw that not through the Q&A, but through the chat, and it's something that we come across in our conversations with customers and prospects. In the financial world, it is all about compliance and safety and safeguarding data. How safe is a cloud platform for video conferencing?
Ooh, well, okay. So to answer that question in two parts, the first one is Logitech doesn't and will never make a cloud-based solution, right? We rely on our partners, all of the Microsofts, the Zooms, all those guys. As far as security is concerned, well, that's a huge question. We could have a whole webinar on that in its own right. Almost, I think all now, but certainly if not all, then 99% of all cloud providers encrypt their video calls. So from someone sniffing your internet connection and grabbing that data, I think that's extremely unlikely. Is it physically possible for that call to be watched at the cloud provider? I suspect technically it isn't. I don't believe it's ever happened or anyone ever does it. It's always a funny one. Companies talk about security, but then when you say to them, well, do you check your meeting rooms for bugs? And they stare at you blankly. No, of course we don't. So I would argue that for most cases, most of the time, most companies find it fine. And by the way, I've dealt with most of the big financial houses over the last 20 years. And a lot of them had quite a lot of concern about cloud solutions initially. And I can understand why. But now most of them, if not all of them, have adopted it to a greater or a lesser extent. Yeah. So I don't think it's a major problem.
Yeah. Additionally, I mean, you talk about that kind of stuff, Simon, but they also do other things like role-based user security, so they can determine who can do what in the meeting, authentications. You can password protect, and other capabilities that they're starting to create as well. So beyond the high level encryption and stuff, there's also other steps they take to ensure that your content's not being viewed by the right people or the wrong people.
Absolutely, Jack. I mean, you're right. If there's enough interest, I'm sure we could build a whole webinar, potentially series of webinars on the whole security world. It's a big thing. I kind of always get somewhat nervous when people say, is it secure? Of course, the question then is, well, what do you define as secure? And most people have very different ideas as to what that really means. But I personally don't think it's a problem. Would the CIA do it? Maybe not. Would almost every other organization I've ever met do it? Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. Let's see here. Two questions. One is based on saying, tell me more, forget, show me. I remember, involve, I will understand. How can the technology, where did that go? How can the technology be used to involve participants?
I could give you a couple of examples.
Yep.
So I went to Kearney, Nebraska a couple of years ago. Not many people like me go to Kearney, Nebraska. It was lovely, actually. I was very impressed. And I met this lady who came up, and I'd never met her before, and she hugged me. And that doesn't happen very often. And I said, well, that's very nice. Thanks for the hug, but who are you and what are you doing here? And she told me that they had installed video conferencing, our types of technology, into deaf kids' homes, all across rural Nebraska, which is obviously all of Nebraska. And what it meant was that these kids could learn to use sign language with other deaf kids. And the reason she said it mattered so much is that most of these children had never met another deaf person before they went to college, or unfortunately, most typically never got to go to college. And they found that it transformed their lives because they could use sign language. And the traditional video conferencing wasn't good enough quality before then for the hand movements to be seen. So that's a good example. Another one is Zoom, as an example, claimed to be in every university in the US. So it's definitely used a lot in higher education. And another one I thought was a lovely one, and this is an older story now, but it still applies to video, was I did some work with some school systems in the UK. And for anyone who knows anything about the UK, you'll know that we are not natural linguists, right? The English expect everyone in the rest of the world to speak English. That's why if you see an Englishman abroad, he's just speaking loudly and slowly at foreigners to make them understand. Speaking English slowly does not make people who don't understand the language understand. But what they did was put video conferencing into schools in England and video conferencing in schools in France. And these kids who were kindergarten, first through third grade, made friends over video. And of course, as soon as you've got a friend, you want to show them things, you want to share things, you want to communicate. And what it did was it gave these kids a reason to learn another language. I'm not saying that they became better linguists due to talking to another 6-year-old, but they became better linguists because they suddenly had a reason to learn it. There's a lot of reasons, and we've got a bunch of case studies around other examples, but there are a couple of examples which I hope would be useful. So on the grounds everyone else has gone silent on me, can I answer a couple of the other questions?
Yeah.
Please,
Coming up on screen.
please jump in and help me, Simon.
Okay, that's fine. I can't do them all, but let me do a couple. Right. So Anonymous, Mr. Anonymous, there's quite a few anonymous folks, but Anonymous has asked us, why can't we have the cable on Meetup for the extra microphone, which we do as an option? Why is it only go 9.5 feet? Well, it's a good question, and we perhaps should explore that. The main reason we only did 9.5 feet was because we didn't expect people to put it in larger rooms. Actual experience is proving to us that people are putting it in larger rooms, and I'm guessing Mr. or Mrs. Anonymous is one of them. As a result, we will be looking at longer cables, and thanks for bringing it up. And then some other folks are asking about integrate Alexa for business conferencing. Yes. Well, you may know Logitech does a lot of work with Amazon, and in fact, we already do devices in our UE Boom audio range which are Alexa enabled. But something to remember about Logitech products or Logitech's video products is they're not codecs, right? We talked about how PCs are effectively so easy now that we're not going to try and beat Intel or Dell or HP, all of whom are partners of ours, at building PCs. So we're going to let them do it. So a lot of clients, a lot of our partners have integrated Alexa into those environments. And they've, interesting varying degree of success, but certainly quite a few people are experimenting with it. And I know that Zoom and Blue Jeans have both played or experimented with integrating Alexa.
Simon, we also have a question around what kind of control PTZ we have with PTZ Pro 2. Can we control a Cisco Touch 10? Do you know the answer to that question by chance?
That's a very good question, and which is my code for I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, we will get somebody to get back to you.
Yeah, that's a technical question that we can get one of our SEs to talk to them about. I can't remember all the details.
All right, let's see what else.
I've got a good one here from Tom. He's asking, we want to equip a conference room that is 10 by 20 feet with a conference table that seats 8. We want to use a 55-inch TV on one wall. What hardware would you recommend using? I think that's a great question, Tom. So let me give you 3 answers. The first one is that room is perhaps bigger than we would have initially predicted for Meetup. So Meetup is one option, but it's probably that room is a little large for what we would do with Meetup. So it wouldn't be my first recommendation. The second one would be Logitech Group, which is our PTZ camera with a conference phone device that sits in the middle of the table. Logitech Group is a little more expensive, about $100 more than Meetup, but it is in no way an expensive solution. So I would probably recommend that today. And depending on your time scale and budget, I think I'd be quite recommending at this point that you come and see us at Infocom, because we would have lots to talk to you at that show about, and I'm not going to say any more. But hopefully that's useful.
I think those are all our questions right now.
Actually, you know, one question that came up right at the beginning, it's probably got buried. Someone asked us, it was the first question that came in. I feel obliged to answer it, but I forget who did. Somebody said, you're running an Intel NUC at the back of or you could run an Intel NUC. What operating system? Well, the answer is we don't really care. My recommendation is that purely because the USB drivers are the easiest, most people run Windows on it. But certain manufacturers of our products, when they build their own room-based solution, so they use our cameras and microphones arrays, but some of our partners use Mac Minis, for example. A little more expensive than the Intel, in the Intel NUC, but it works perfectly well. We have had some users run Linux. I suspect they mainly do it because, you know, Linux is cool and they want to show how impressive they are. Linux can have some issues about USB drivers, but it's a bit more complicated. But then I suspect most people who run Linux like it, that it's a bit complicated. So hopefully that's useful.
And one more question of what would you do in large rooms?
Well, it depends on your definition of large. If your large room is anything up to about a 60-seater, 30 by 30, thank you, Damien. Damon, I'm sorry. Depends how many people sit in it. I would again recommend Infocom is a show that you want to either come to or come and talk to us about. And if you're in urgent need, then I'm sure that we can arrange a conversation between yourself and Nicole after this public event.
Excellent. Paul?
Well, thank you, everyone. Great.
One more question, if you don't mind, guys.
Go for it, Nicole.
Bradley asked if the mic cable connector a Thunderbolt / mini display port connector, and can we get a pinout? Bradley, are you asking about that for Meetup? Yes. Okay.
I'm sure we can get you a pinout, and no, it is not a Thunderbolt mini display port connector. It just looks like one. And I would like to speak on behalf of product management as to why they do unusual ones, but I'm not going to because I don't know the answer to that.
Mic extension Meetup. All right, we're getting these questions down so we know what to answer. Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Jay, Nicole, Simon, thank you. And of course, all the attendees. As I mentioned earlier, we will be sending an email with all the to the winners of the Logitech Brios. We'll have a follow-up email with a replay to the webinar in case you missed something or you want to share this with your colleagues. And of course, those of you who need some additional help, we will reach out to you as well. Thank you and have a great day.